Hey there, I'm Steven Steve Joan-Ribs Jorbs. I'm coming at you with another Spireside chat tonight. Tonight I'm going to talk about equity. If you don't know anything about Spireside chats, the general idea of these videos is that I just kick back and chat about some concept that I think about a lot in Slay the Spire for a while, and hopefully viewers can get something out of it. A really valuable thing for me in making these videos is that as a full-time streamer on Twitch, if I get asked a question about something that's sort of important to how I'm playing Slay the Spire, I don't always have enough time to answer it fully while I'm broadcasting live to, thousands of people. There are lots of people asking different questions, and if something deserves a 10-minute answer, I usually can't give it a 10-minute answer while I'm streaming. So instead I can link people to a video like this. So this is not going to be a super highly polished YouTube video. I'm not a full-time YouTuber. I get the stuff that I have on YouTube onto YouTube in maybe 15 minutes a day. This is just going to be me chatting about equity for a bit. Equity is a term that I reference a decent amount in playing Slay the Spire. I've actually been avoiding using it lately because it's not a very common word to use about games, I don't think. But I want to explain what exactly I mean when I say it, because it's going on in my head and I want to be able to use it more often while talking about runs. So I used to play poker professionally, and equity is a term that gets used in poker to describe what percentage of a pot you own, sort of. So if I get dealt pocket aces in No Limit Hold'em and I go all in and somebody calls me with pocket kings, I definitely have the better hand right now, right? I have a pair of aces, they have a pair of kings. But I don't win the pot automatically. We still have to deal out the flop, turn, and river, and then at the end to see if maybe they made a straight, or they have 3 kings now, and I still just have the pair of aces, and they actually win the pot. And so, in order to communicate what has just happened, we recognize that my aces expect to win against kings about 82% of the time in that situation. And instead of reporting the hand by talking about who actually won at the end, we say, I got all of my money in with 82% equity. And as a professional poker player, often when I got all of my money in on a hand, I was playing lots of other tables online at the same time and stuff. I didn't even look to see who won, ultimately, because that is ultimately completely irrelevant. What matters is that I'm getting my money in good, basically, that I'm getting my money in and expecting to win most of the time. Equity gets used in far, far, far more complicated situations than this in poker, but that is the general idea. When I talk about equity, I'm talking about basically my chance to win in this situation. And so this concept works in Slay the Spire too. So equity is not something you can usually calculate in Slay the Spire like you can in poker, unfortunately. But you can still try to approximate it, try to guess at it, try to intuit it from, all of the runs that you've played before this one in Slay the Spire. And it's really important to be doing this because it's the only logically consistent way you can think about which choice is better. You can't look at a choice and think, I like this card more than the other card, so I'm going to pick it, and have that be logically consistent, have that be something that you can go tell another player and have it make sense to them too. And I'm not saying that you have to play Slay the Spire based only on picking the things that you think are most likely to win, because you can play Slay the Spire by picking things which are fun for you, or by picking things which are new so that you can learn new stuff. That could be a way to increase your win rate over time by doing things which you actually don't think are more likely to win right now, but you're, learning and improving, and that's something that I've done before, for sure. But in terms of talking with other players about which things are the best things to do in Slay the Spire, this is sort of the gold standard. This is the metric that you have to use. Which thing is more likely to make you win? Because that is the consistent one that will be the same and stay the same for everybody, as everybody's talking about the game. One thing that's a little bit complicated about equity is that I'm a different player from somebody else. And so if I'm very comfortable at using a certain set of cards and they're very comfortable at using a certain other set of cards, they might perceive their equity with one set of cards to be higher than I do, and I perceive my equity with the other set of cards to be higher than they do. And all of a sudden you have a situation where, because both of us are imperfect players, neither of us is playing the game without ever making a mistake or anything, we actually have different ideas of what the right thing for us to be doing is. And that can make sense, and that's actually still internally consistent. You just have to establish what sort of player are you. So you might be looking at a run, and you have the option to take some very complicated combo that could win for you, and you're just thinking, that seems way too complicated to pull off. I wouldn't know which other cards to draft later to support this. It seems like not the thing for me. I'm going to do the more simple thing that I've done before and that I know works. And that can make sense. You can say that that's improving your win rate by more. But again, going back to the concept of, like, you could try to do the complicated thing to learn and get to a point where you're more comfortable doing other stuff. As a player in Slay the Spire, I feel like I have reached a point where I understand what all of the cards do. So I'm almost never doing things just to see what would happen, just to learn more about the game anymore. At this point, I'm at a point where I'm pretty comfortable making decisions based on how likely they are to win, almost exclusively. So let's abstract this concept of equity and look at some things that make sense to do and some things that don't make sense to do with it in mind. When we're looking at fights, I may have missed something, by the way. I typed this out really quickly, but the things which ultimately matter when you're done with a fight, to me, in my head at least, are how many hit points you have as you leave the fight, how many potions you leave the fight with, were you able to conserve a potion instead of losing it, whether you successfully stack relics in the most useful number of charges. So if you have like a pen nib, you may want it on like 8 charges or 9 charges. If you have a sundial or a happy flower, you might want them to go off the next time they have a chance to. If you have incense burner, often there's a very specific number you want it to be on, so you want it to go off exactly 2 turns into the next fight, perhaps, because you have an anchor for turn 1, or you know that you're fighting against the Act 4 elite in the next fight, so you want it to go off on turn 2 for that fight. So manipulating where your relics, which stack charges are, can be actually very important in fights. And then whether or not you successfully stack cards with persistent stacking effects, so like Feed, Genetic Algorithm, Ritual Dagger. I'm not sure if there are any other cards in the game that have persistent stacking effects, but getting those to stack up is valuable, for sure. These are the 4 things that I could think of that mattered in fights, and other things do not matter in fights. They have no impact on your win rate leaving the fight. So whether you win the fight in 2 turns or 7 turns is not actually relevant. If you have a deck that's winning a fight in 12 turns, and it's like a hallway fight, that may be a symptom of the fact that the deck doesn't have enough damage to win the run. But that's not relevant in the fight that you just had. What that means is that later on, you're going to have a fight where it doesn't deal any damage and it dies. That's your problem. Your problem isn't that this fight took 7 turns. Yeah. Very many times when people backseat my play as I'm streaming and say, hey, why did you do this? Or couldn't you have done that? It would have been more damage or something like that. The thing they are suggesting, like in the example I just gave, maximizing damage, this thing does not interact at all favorably with any of these 4 categories. It doesn't actually make me leave the fight with more equity. And so often people are thinking like, hey, you could have ended the fight that turn by doing this sequence of plays, and you missed out on lethal, which is a thing in Hearthstone, for example. Getting lethal the turn you have lethal is a big deal in Hearthstone. But this is a different game. In this game, getting lethal 1 turn may be incorrect because you have these other things to consider. Maybe you want to wait to play Reaper so that you leave the fight with more health. Maybe you want to wait to play Alchemize so that you get another potion. Maybe you want to wait another turn on Sunflower, Happy Flower, or Incense Burner. Or maybe you're trying to wait to get Genetic Algorithm. In fact, maybe you're trying to wait with Creative AI to make an Echo Form so that you can play Genetic Algorithm twice, because Genetic Algorithm stacks twice if you play it with Echo Form. So there are a bunch of things that are always, in fact, more important than maximizing your damage in a fight more important than ending the fight on the fastest possible turn. Those things like maximizing damage and ending the fight as quickly as possible are actually not relevant. Not relevant unless they affect these criteria in the game. Similarly, in card choices, our goal is not going to be to... about that? Our goal is not going to be to like make a constructed deck, make a deck that perfectly counters the final boss in the game, or anything like that. Our goal is to make a deck which gets through the remaining floors of the run as high a percentage of the time as possible, that wins the run as high a percentage of the time as possible. And so building a perfect poison deck is not the goal. The goal is building a deck that can fight all the enemies that it might end up having to fight and not die. So I certainly understand the idea of wanting a deck that does one thing really, really strongly, and that can feel really cool, and it can feel just sort of safe and comforting to be building toward that thing. And so sometimes what I do is I'll say that I'm meant to do something, which takes me away from that. So if I have 2 Reapers and 2 Limit Breaks in my deck, and I'm looking at a pick where there's a 3rd Limit Break, I'll say, wow, that 3rd Limit Break looks super strong, that could do some really bonkers stuff. But I know that Reptimancer is the only fight left in the game that might kill me, and so I'm meant to take Immolate here, and I'll take Immolate. And I think sometimes taking a step back from what you want to do, what your like gut says, oh, that would be so fun and cool and whatever, taking a step back and just imagining what this unfeeling, perfect machine that was playing Slay the Spire and winning as often as possible would do, and recognizing that, you know, it's not got this emotional attachment to making the perfect poison deck or whatever. It maybe doesn't care that much if it has 2 curses in its deck, because it knows that it can deal with them, and the thing that it's getting out of taking the curses is worth it. That recognizing that sort of stuff is very important in Slay the Spire, and getting away from sort of emotional attachments to building the perfect deck, or building a deck that doesn't have any bad cards in it, or fighting every elite fight if you like fighting every elite fight. Sometimes you're meant to skip elite fights because they're dangerous and the fights after them aren't dangerous, so you don't really need to win them. Or, on the other hand, do fight elite fights sometimes. Like, sometimes you're like, this deck could lose a third of the time in elite fights, that's really bad. But then you look at the rest of the run and you're like, oh, if this deck doesn't get stronger now, it's just certainly going to lose against the Act boss. So I might as well take the risk and fight this elite now, and yeah, I'll lose sometimes and it will feel sort of bad maybe, but I can see that I have to be taking a risk like that. Funny that I was just saying the word risk. So a thing that comes up a lot with equity, and one of the reasons that I wanted to make this video tonight, is the idea of plays being risky is something that people bring up quite a lot as they're watching my stream, and I never know how to respond to it, because risky isn't really a thing in this game. The only thing that consistently and logically makes sense that matters is what % of the time a play wins, and the only risk involved is that you would lose, which is, you know, the times that you don't win, you will lose, which means that the play that wins the most often is the least risky. So if somebody says risky, in my experience, they could mean a lot of different things. And the first thing I have to do is work out exactly what they mean, and then I have to explain, you know, why that isn't actually the primary consideration. So they could mean that the deck might die in the next few floors. But again, if I see that I'm going to die at the Act boss unless I get stronger, I should be using the next few floors to maybe fight some elites that are risky fights, because I need to get stronger, or the bigger risk is that I die to the Act 2 boss, you know? I might not get enough strength to beat the boss fight. This is like the inverse of the thing. Sometimes if I don't take the more aggressive path, somebody will say, that seems risky. It seems risky to think that you can beat the champ this way. But sometimes it's like, I'm weighing the pros and cons, and I'm thinking, okay, I get to take 2 stores in this path, I have 200 gold, there's a decent chance that I can get a well-laid plans and a catalyst or something like that. You know, there are many different solutions for the champ fight that I might be able to see. And I just think this deck isn't very good at elites, so I'm not going to take the elites and am going to go to the stores, and I think that that is the more likely to win play. They could mean... Sometimes people mean that play is, like, complicated, and so there's a risk that I will make a mistake, which is a really legitimate thing to think about. And going back to recognizing who you are as a player, sometimes you're going to want to avoid plays which are, like, unusual and difficult for you specifically because you've never done them before. If you're, like, in your Ascension 20 run, and this is your first chance to beat Ascension 20, and you get offered a card that you've never successfully used before, or a card that, you know, maybe theoretically it's not quite as good, but you've used it before and know exactly what to do with it and stuff, sure, go ahead and use the card that you know, because probably for you that will give you the highest chance to win. And so I think that's actually a place where risky does sort of make sense, but what is meant by risky there is that option could lead to you making mistakes. So even though like a perfect machine player would think that that was the best choice, for a human player like me or you, that choice isn't actually the best because it's just so complicated to use. That's what is actually being meant by risky in that situation, so that's what somebody would have to say to me to communicate what they're trying to say. Or it might just make somebody draw a bad hand soon, so like playing acrobatics here is risky because if you draw your corruption... How are we drawing corruption with acrobatics? This is a very odd deck, but if you draw your Wraith form, we'll say, you won't have enough energy left to play it, and so, you know, you won't get your Wraith form down this time through the deck. That could be risky. In that case, risky is either meaning more likely to lose, in which case you just say, like, that's the worst play, would be how I would say. If a play is more likely to lose, and that's why it's riskier, I would just say it's worse. Or that risk that's involved isn't as big a deal as what else is going on. Like, maybe I'm getting attacked for 24 this turn, and I just have to acrobatics because I have to hit a piercing whale, and sometimes I'm going to lose the Wraith form, and that sucks. That's a risk involved in my play, but it's still the better play. There is greater risk in not doing it, because the damage that I take by not doing it is a bigger deal. So, yeah, that's generally an overview of how I'm thinking about equity and why I'm thinking about equity and how I'm using it to inform my decisions and my attempts to get better at the game. I think that it's very important to understand the concept of maximizing your win rate as a goal for improving at games. You don't necessarily always have to adhere just to that goal. You can play games for fun. I play games for fun. You can play games for the story, like you can roleplay a little bit, you can get into narrative, you can play games because you like the graphics, you can play games to socialize and hang out with friends. So when I talk about equity, I'm not saying like every time that you play a game you have to do this thing. I'm just saying in order to talk to other people about Slay the Spire and talk about what the correct play is, the internally consistent thing that will help us all get better and win more often is to talk about win rate. And it's going to be a lot more difficult to get anywhere by saying like, oh, this is the most fun way to play Slay the Spire, and then someone else is like, no, I don't enjoy that, because what is fun is dependent on, you know, who you are and what you enjoy. But what is the most likely to win is dependent on the rules of the game. And the rules of the game are the same for everybody. Okay, cool. So I hope you enjoyed the Spire side chat. I've been Joe and Ribs. I hope you're enjoying the daily YouTube runs that I've been uploading. Feel free to stop by my Twitch channel and say hi. Jump into the Discord and say hi there. Love having you. And I hope to see you next time. Please let me know if you enjoyed this video and want to see more Spire side chats. I haven't been doing as many of these lately. I've been prioritizing streaming and doing F2K stuff and getting daily runs uploaded to YouTube and things like that. So if you really like a video like this, let me know in the comments so that I know that you're out there and you're really missing these, and I can make some more. They're easy enough to do. All right, cool. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.